Well, welcome to Emotional Resilience, Living with the Fruit of the Spirit. I'm your host and author, Ron Ovitt. I'm glad you're here tonight. Exciting topic. We're going to be talking about Taming the Inner Critic, Part 2. If you haven't heard Part 1 yet, I encourage you to go back to Moraine Valley's YouTube page, and you can find it there, and you can look at it. You can also find it on Mr. Change Agent Facebook page. I have it listed there on Mr. Change Agent Facebook page as well. So you can listen tonight, and then if you didn't get the other one, you can go ahead and get that, and you can ask me for the notes if you want. If you don't have the notes, you can write me at ron@empowerministry.org, ron@empowerministry.org, and ask for the notes. Better yet, just say, hey, put me on an email list, and then you'll be getting the notes ahead of time each week. And so we'll be doing that if you give us that information, okay? So tonight we want to continue on taming your inner critic. And so let's get right into it, We're talking about that part of us that's so negative, that part of us that has that inner chatter going on, that doubt and fear and stories. And tonight we want to tackle that. So let's ask God to go ahead and speak to our hearts. And Father, I thank you, Lord, that you know all about us. Lord, you know about our mind, you know about our brain. Father, you know about the thoughts that come in there. So just help us tonight understand more what we can do to tame this negativity that we so often just attacks us. So we thank you now in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I'm excited to bring us in prayer. As a pastor, minister for all my life, I believe in the spiritual part of it, and I believe that God cares about these things, and he can help us. And so his love can change a lot of these things. He can reparent us, because you'll find out tonight that a lot of this negativity comes from the way we were raised. We're not here to bash any parents or say anything like that, but the fact is we're children, and children get certain impressions and beliefs, sometimes as a result of direct abuse, sometimes just misunderstandings, whatever. But we were children, and we interpreted things. And we interpreted things about ourselves and about others and about life. And these create certain messages. So our inner critic is made up of scripts, programs, and beliefs. And you can find this on page 1, okay? We have a preconceived image of ourselves in our head. So when we experience this emotional triggers and our inner beliefs begin, we react to that trigger accordingly. That's a result of the way we were raised. I mean, it came out of childhood, whether we had caregivers or parents or whatever. Going to school, a lot of things. I've watched my own grandchildren. I was too close to it with my own children, because I was, being a parent myself. And I know some of the things I've done wrong and have caused things, and I've tried to correct that with my children. But I watch through my grandchildren some of the things that they come up with, beliefs about themselves and attitudes about themselves that I know weren't purposeful. I know my children and that are raising them. It's just, kids have things at school. They have other influences. That a lot of times, TV, and they're on the internet all the time, and they're getting messages. And they start equating themselves with those messages, and they start judging themselves, and they start believing themselves. And so it just causes this way of believing ourselves, the messages, and soon they become a permanent part of our self-image. Now, permanent in the sense that if we don't do anything about them. The good news is we can change. The good news is we don't have to keep these inner scripts alive and well. We can change, and there's hope tonight in that, so that's good. But if nothing happens, nothing changes, nothing will change. And so we need to be proactive on this. Much like a script dictates what an actor is going to say, or the software program, right, dictates how a computer will react to the keystrokes that we make, so the messages that we internalize become like a self-script or a self-program for our life. They're like filters. If I had a filter on this that colored things, I'd see a certain colors, right? Because it's filtered through the lenses of my glasses. And likewise, our life a lot of times is filtered through these inner beliefs that we have. So the reactions that we have to these inner scripts and programs and beliefs can vary. And depending upon what we heard and we're influenced up, we end up with different scripts, programs, and beliefs. And they cause us to react to life differently. Now, on page 1 here, I've given you 2 lists, positive reactions and negative reactions. If you don't have the notes, again, you can follow along, but email me, ron@empowerministry.org, and I'll send them to you so you can look at them. But when you see some of the positive reactions, you have empowerment. We feel empowered. But the opposite end is that we feel this helplessness, this learned helplessness. And we're in a continuum somewhere, and it depends with who and with what situations. We may feel real good in sports, but in social interactions, we may feel more helpless, you see. And so it depends on sometimes the situation, the people, but we know when we're starting to feel that negative stuff. And so we have self-respect or self-loathing, influential or we're a victim. We can do something about ourselves, the environment, or we're just a victim. And, we can feel loved or we need to people please in order to gain the love. We have the ability to forgive ourselves or we're unforgiving. We have this crippling guilt. You see the continuum there? Look at those and ask yourself, where am I? Where am I? Now, we talked about this last time that, we're not going to change if we're not honest with ourselves. And the trouble is sometimes we read these things, we say, well, I don't believe that. And really what's going on is that I shouldn't believe that, okay? I shouldn't believe that. Somewhere we're able to believe 2 things at the same time. That's a rather new phenomenon. It's a philosophical approach. We can sit here and say we believe we're okay, and yet inside believe that we're not okay. It's something going on there that we can believe things or dismiss things just because they're words. But let me ask you this, what do you feel? We did that last time, I think, where we talked about, what do you think about this? What do you feel about this? Have you felt, a self-respect or a self-loathing? Have you felt loved or this need to please others? You're not sure about whether you're loved or not. And so if you can't, you might want to answer both ways. Say, okay, this is kind of what I want to believe or I believe, but this is how I feel. And when you start seeing the feelings in there, then ask yourself again, what am I really believing? What am I really believing? Because here again, we want change. We don't want to just cope. We want to change. We want to change. And so look at these things, peace, fearful, cause and effect, life is chaotic, so look at those, okay? Well, emotional abuse is a lot of times the root of the inner critic. Now, it doesn't have to be real severe abuse, but it can be things that maybe were unintentional, but they happened. And here again, they may not have be such a horrible thing, but they were interpreted by children. And so when our parents go through a divorce, what does the child say? I mean, no parent wanted to do that. They weren't being mean-spirited. It wasn't abuse, right? But a child sits there and thinks, did they divorce because of me? That's why we got to counsel children when the families go through divorce, where they understand it wasn't their fault. Otherwise, that's what children do. It becomes, what did I do? What's wrong with me? And we can get these negative feelings, these inner chatter going that just is constantly condemning us and doing things because of life circumstances. Let's look at this. We all have an inner critic. When normal, it's more like a conscience and internal regulations by which we live life, and that's a good thing. It cautions us when we're contemplating something against our internal standards. If we go against it, the results can be guilt and resulting emotions. The old picture, the angel on one shoulder, the devil on another, symbolizing that conscience. Well, we want a conscience. We want a healthy conscience. And that can be part of this inner critic, right? Hey, careful, what are you doing? But that's usually not the kind of inner critic that bothers us, isn't it? It's when we do something wrong, it doesn't just sit there and say, well, gee, that's wrong, you shouldn't have done it. It berates, what's wrong with you? What a stupid idiot. What kind of fool are you? And boom, ba-boom, boom, boom, negativity, right? You're going to really get it, and fear comes in and all this stuff, right? See, a severe inner critic comes from a different place than a healthy conscience. Comes from a different place. It's not a normal conscience, but an overbearing, abusing tyrant that has no mercy, compassion, or understanding toward our behavior. And it's often a result of emotional things that went on in our childhood. Now, we're talking about a continual pattern here. Every parent has times when we rupture, and we say things we don't want to say. We're trying to control. We got 4 or 5 kids, and it's like whack-a-mole, One quiets down, the other one talks, and it's like, enough already. And sometimes we blow up, right? Sometimes, and we go what? We go back and we repair, rupture and repair. And a child normally would know that the parent that's consistent isn't usually like that. And so that stuff doesn't necessarily cause, although sometimes we can, a child can overreact to some of those negative things. And in their mind now, that's a script that they're going to take. They're going to take that tone of voice with themselves. And so I believe we can do the best we can as parents, but then it's up to us as children that are maturing to take the responsibility for a lot of this, to take the responsibility to change these things. And that's why we teach this class, where we can go ahead and take that responsibility we need to as adults and change the things that need to be changed. Now, abuse is when things like this, negative stuff, happen on a regular basis, and it demoralizes the child's sense of worth. They feel that they're unworthy of love and affection. Forms of emotional abuse include neglect, abandonment, verbal abuse, physical abuse, excessive demands, harsh ridicule, humiliations, severely overprotective parents, withholding love, chaotic behavior, could be due to addictions or mental illness or some other things. And so, it's not always intentional, but it can happen. And it's happened a lot to families. We have a lot of dysfunction in America, a lot of dysfunction. And it's not surprising. I deal all the time with people that have to recorrect some of the things because of the childhood that they were in. Well, how strong is your inner critic? Look at page 2 at the top. Look at page 2 at the top there. And how strong is your inner critic or these beliefs, Look at each one here and ask yourself, how often do I think this? How often do I think it? And how strong is it? How strong is it? Rate it on its strength. I don't think about it often, or I think about it very often. And then, it's really, and then ask yourself, how strong is it? And you'll find out the more you use it that it's probably really strength. So I need to please others. I have a high standard for myself. I will not start something I think I could fail at. I berate myself if I make a mistake. I worry about what others think of me. Now, some of us think, Ron, we should worry about what other people think. I mean, I should be tough on myself when I do wrong. And for many of us, we don't see necessarily anything wrong with these because it's our normal. It's our normal. And these things seem somewhat normal. Now, it's a degree, right? It's a degree. Of course, we should think about when we've done something wrong, how we can correct it, right? But berating ourselves is a whole different story. And so if we need to read these, and if you find yourself arguing with it, ask yourself, okay, am I arguing because it's my normal? And maybe I need to really consider this? Or do I really have an intellectual problem with this? I start to panic if I think I'm in trouble. Now, that could be a very normal person for someone that's very anxious and that's the way we control, but that's not normal. We shouldn't be panicking, you see. And so take these things in stride. It's not here to put you down. If you have some of these things, that's not the end of the world here, okay? We can't correct something we don't acknowledge. And wouldn't it be good? Let's take that panic one. If when you're in trouble, you don't panic, wouldn't that be great? I mean, we're concerned. We're taking control, but we're not panicked, okay? And I'm critical toward myself. It's okay to judge yourself and say, okay, I could have done better, but not that severe critical spirit. And so read these over and ask yourself, where am I on these? How strong are these? How often do I do it? And you'll see that you'll start to get some of a picture of maybe how that inner critic's working in your life. Now here again, don't panic over this, okay? But don't ignore it neither. This is something, make notes, commit it to God, and let's work a plan to change some of these things, okay? Now, let's look at some of the parental styles of the inner critic. What are some? Well, if we had a neglectful or an abandoning parent, then there are some results. There are different ways to neglect or abandon a child. Not taking care of the child's need is neglect. Not being there for periods of time can be neglect and abandonment. Now, how does a child know that all is well in the world and that they are valued and cared for unless we as parents, caregivers, look at them, hold them, soothe them, and comfort them in a consistent manner? Sometimes not comforting children emotionally can be that neglect. And so often it bothers us as parents when our children are being emotional and we want to stifle it, but sometimes we need to be able to listen to that. We need to be able to hold them and soothe them and talk about it and not just push it down. And so we want a child to be able to correctly express their emotions where we can talk about them and not neglect that need for them to be comforted. Because where else are they going to get comfort, you see? And for some of us, we really miss that. I can't remember being hugged when I was a child. I can't remember my parents saying, I love you very much. I used to say that to my dad in my 20s and 30s, come home and hug him, trying to get him to respond. And he finally started doing it. But I remember that missing in my life. And, a parent who is, maybe addicted to substance, has some issues there. They can't necessarily meet the needs, emotional needs of their children. They'll be absent sometimes, or they're in certain moods. And we can't bother Dad tonight, right? And so, there's different ways. Sometimes not getting enough positive attention or food or protection or sleep. Adequate clothing. If you got too many children in the house, sometimes you can't meet the needs of everyone. Sometimes there's siblings hurting each other and we're not controlling that situation. It's not safe. I know of families where siblings really hurt each other and the parents didn't know what to do. And the child suffered because of that, you see. There would not be enough signs of affection or love is another way. And then, of course, death, which no one wants, but death sometimes is obviously the ultimate abandonment. It wasn't purposeful, but nevertheless, the child is there without that parent. Divorce causes some of those issues. And so prolonged hospitalization, being sent to boarding schools, different things like that can really cause some of this, okay? Now, here's the good news. We can correct these things. We can work on these things. That's part of maturity. That's why we have this class. It's emotional resilience, okay? But we need to be aware of some of these. Now, the child who is neglected can grow up being anxious and insecure with low self-esteem. Abandonment can result in feelings of low self-worth. The threat of abandonment works just as well. It causes high anxiety. Remember, this is a child who's feeling this. It can result in severe inability to delay gratification or even a self-loathing. And so, that can help them. Now, let's look at page 3 here, the smothering or the intrusive parent. The smothering parents are overly protective, invested, controlling, overbearing, and intrusive into their child's life. And sometimes this is hard to see. Sometimes it comes with good intentions. The parent can be possessive, consuming the child. In extreme cases, the parent may make the child the confidant, sharing information about their own self way beyond the need of the child to know. And that happens sometimes in a situation when one parent's gone and the other becomes the confidant, and it has to grow up, and it can really cause some of the problems with the child later on. This dumping on a child can be overwhelming, and the results of being smothered, it makes it hard for the child to break away from the parents and be their own individual. They may feel over-scrutinized or watched. Without space, it's hard to create our own personality. Many are overly concerned about the damages on the parent if they leave, so they don't. And this can also cause us to live in fear about being on our own. Caring for others, taking care of our own needs. It can result in underachievement sometimes, and we can carry a lot of times that overprotective voice in our head. Just like we can with the first one, we can hear that inner critic loud and clear. We can also hear this overbearing conscience going on. There can be the abusive, shaming, hypercritical parent. Parents that are overbearing, tyrannical, and shaming believe strongly in obedience and authority and make sure that the child toes the line. However, it's not done through good, healthy parenting, but a lot of times by intimidation, shaming, or being severely critical. Maybe it's severe spankings or public humiliation and belittling. I can't tell you how many times in counseling I've talked to people that told me about humiliation that their parents did upon them in order to discipline them and make sure they are doing right, embarrassing them in front of friends and people that were over, belittling them, threats of violence, abandonment, extreme put-downs, nasty name-calling are all forms of getting a child to behave, but it doesn't create a healthy inner critic for the child. It doesn't. And they can be cruel and inflexible, using words like shame on you. They belittle, blame, and often show contempt for the children. Over comparison to others, degrading words like stupid, idiot, put-downs are used frequently. And I've counseled with many people that just say, well, you should have seen me, though. I was horrible. I don't blame my parents. I deserve that. Well, that's nice. And you may think that, and that's nice, but the truth is it shouldn't have happened. There should have been better ways, right? There should have been better ways. And so we can forgive. Certainly we can forgive. I'm not saying we have to feel blame and do all this kind of stuff. What I'm saying is that we need to realize that we may be carrying some beliefs and thoughts because of this. And so we don't have to, cause a lot of ruckus over it. What we need to do is understand that it happened, and that as a result we may have, let's look at this, results of children being raised by abusive shaming. A child under these conditions will feel weakened, stupid, inadequate, being discouraged from trying something or taking risks. Their confidence is low, and self-esteem is very low. It's hard for a child to try to succeed or be motivated to try again. There's a fear of being found out by others that you are broken, no good, damaged goods, so you will not try as many new things. There can be a rage a lot of times because of this. It can be expressed toward others or buried deep inside, resulting in depression. Depression a lot of times is this anger turned inwards. And so if you have some of those symptoms, we want to work on it. We want to work on it. And that's what this program's about. That's why we want to have this emotional recognition when some of these things are happening. We want to be able to label it right and call it faulty wiring, that, hey, these things aren't true, and to be able to regulate our emotions. And then we want to change some of these inner beliefs that we have. And we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. And then as we go on, we're going to spend the next couple weeks really working strong on emotional regulation. And it's going to be different because we're going to talk about breathing. We're going to talk about a lot of the physical things that we can do that will calm it down, where we can get to that prefrontal cortex and start thinking differently, okay? Well, then we have what I call the inner fanatic. The inner fanatic. Now, that's an extreme form of inner persuasion that goes deeper than just thinking. It's what I call the inner fanatic. It deeply believes all the propaganda that has been fed into our brain and is a true believer in all the lies that we believe about ourselves. Our inner fanatic will go to any length to get us to behave in what it believes to be correct behavior. This is the part of us that will become the antagonistic to any change in our thinking. It will become a saboteur toward any change in our behavior. And why is this? Why can't we have all of our parts believe in this new life that we want to live? Because it's not a cognitive belief that can just simply be changed by someone giving us a logical, contradicting theory. Now, I'll give you plenty of those. And we're talking, cognitively here. You shouldn't believe that. Why would you believe you're stupid? But the trouble is, it's emotionally learned. A lot of these things are emotionally learned. And so the only way we're going to learn new is to emotionally relearn. If a child really is fearful and they're really scared of a snake, then just telling them that, hey, that snake's not going to bother you. That snake's not poisonous. Or just leave that snake. They're more afraid of you than you are of them. That's not going to help the child. That might help for a few seconds because they believe you're going to take the snake away. But you try to put their hand toward that snake and you'll see how quick that child still fears. It's an emotional belief. I'm going to die. Something's wrong here. I can't go near that. And all the cognitive reasoning in the world won't necessarily change it. It needs to be experiential. It needs to be emotionally relearned. And so you can go through systematic desensitization where they can emotionally, step by step, feel more comfortable, emotionally start to believe they're okay, emotionally believe that that snake isn't going to hurt them. And so and that's what we have to do with some of these inner beliefs, these inner critical negative beliefs about ourselves. We need to call them out, but then we need to really start believing the truth about ourselves. And we'll talk about that. It's an emotionally learned belief, and we can only be changed by a new emotional belief that supplants it. Now, we're on the top of page 4 here. And again, if you don't have the notes, you can write me at ron@empowerministry.org. ron@empowerministry.org, and just say notes, or better yet, email, and I'll put you on the email list. We must emotionally relearn the truth. Our false beliefs were believed by that primal part of us that is scared to death, that is so conditioned by our implicit memory and dead set against change that will do anything to get us to act consistent with what it thinks is representative of our true self. It comes from a very frightening place when our life was based on fear bonds. These fear bonds that were created, not love bonds. Fear and shame are powerful, deep-rooted belief systems and emotions. It's the part of us that frustrates us the most. It's the part of you that will act out anyway. It has to, in order to be consistent with the lies you believe. Even if you have consciously decided that you must change your behavior, your inner fanatic will fight to get its twisted way. It's the part that says we must go back to our addiction. It's the part that leads us there, even though we said we aren't going to do this anymore. It's the part that acts out in behavior that is opposite of what we're starting to believe can finally be true for us. It's the part that says, go ahead and look at that website, right? It denies that things are really wrong. It will not hear the part of us that tells us to stop. It is also the part of us that Satan, in our spiritual beliefs, right? Satan likes to lure us into action because it's a part of us that's vulnerable. Paul talks about this in Romans. Listen to what he says about the dilemma that he had about behavior. You can read it with me in middle of page 4 here. The trouble is with me, for I am all too human, a slave to sin. I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I'm not really the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. It's that human nature, right? That sinful nature of us. And a lot of this comes out of these negative beliefs that we believe. Paul calls it our sinful self. But think about it. Much of what we call sin is acting out in a negative way in order to regulate our emotions. Lying, cheating, fighting, quarreling, these and other sinful behaviors are the result of trying to protect ourselves from what we perceive to be dangerous in order to keep a status quo. James talks about that. We want certain things, we don't get them, we go to war. And why do we want certain things? Because we think it will make us a better person or better in someone else's eyes, right? It's all this stuff because we're constantly trying to correct our negative self-image. And it leads to sin. The answer, I believe, is emotional relearning, right? These things are learned emotionally, and they need to be relearned. Bruce Eckert and Laura Hawley have developed a counseling technique called coherence therapy. It's based on a theory that we're motivated by these internal emotional learnings. It's a lot what I've been teaching here. I came across their book a little while ago. And emotional learnings are beliefs that are coherent to our inner self learned at a younger age and are emotionally reinforced. And it causes us to escape, right? What I call escape. Our overindulgence and excitement, substance, comfort, avoidance, people, emotionalism, sex, avoidance. I mean, you can add more. You know, when we feel anxious, we long to be comforted. In other words, we do things to help us regulate our emotions. And, of course, the trouble is comfort can go to the extreme, right? And so we have all this stuff, these escapes. And look at page 5 here, in the middle of page 5. Listen to what Bruce Eckert and Laura Hawley say. Instead, we're in the middle of page 5 here. Instead, our unconscious reactions are really reactions by us at a particular age, where we then develop a core belief or schema based on a particular situation, which is a memory, that was highly problematic, resulting in specific emotions and body response. We have real, living, personal knowledge, that's emotional knowledge, of how that situation affects our safety, well-being, and sense of justice in the world. Because of this real, living, emotional knowledge, it becomes dramatically urgent to behave, feel, or to think certain predictable ways. Why? They say this. 1, to assure our safety from perceived certain threats. 2, and this is crucial, to avert an even worse suffering that would result from not behaving in a certain way. Now that is an incredible paragraph, and it would do you well to read it over again. We've been teaching this for 15 years, and I had to put their quote in here because I couldn't say it better myself. And they've done a lot of research on this and have done a lot of empirical testing on the different kind of counseling things that help here. And they hit the nail on the head. Instead of our unconscious reactions, our really reactions us at a particular age when we develop a core belief or schema based on a particular situation that was highly problematic, resulting in specific emotions and body. That's why we call them embodied beliefs. That's why we call them embodied beliefs. That's why we call them emotional learnings. And what we need to do is emotionally relearn. And according to them, here's 4 questions on the bottom of page 5 that you can ask yourself when you're starting to, act out. When you're starting to do these escapes, right? When you're starting to get into that negative behavior, negative thinking. What's that negative thinking or behavior doing, for you that is valued or needed in your own inner world? What's it doing for you? And that's a great question. What am I gaining from thinking this? What am I gaining from feeling this way? What am I gaining from doing this? What am I gaining? Second, is this really a success or a failure? Is acting out this way, doing this stuff, really a success? Am I really succeeding just because I'm doing it and I feel I need to do it, or is it really a failure? Otherwise, what problem is this really a solution to, or an attempt to a solution? I mean, I'm doing this, I'm acting out this way, I'm feeling this way. What's it solving? Chances are it's not solving anything. And then what are the unwelcome? And this is critical because I often talk about this. It isn't just your beliefs, it's the consequence of the beliefs that scares us. And here's their question. What are the unwelcome or dreaded consequences that would result if I don't do, and I call it escapes, if I don't do this certain behavior or think that certain way or have those certain thoughts? What would happen? What's the consequence? What dread would happen if at that moment of emotional urgency I did not do it? And then how is that negative thinking or that behavior or whatever, that mood swing, whatever it is I'm doing, how is that really a byproduct of maybe some interpretation, belief, or prediction from an earlier situation? And those are great questions. I mean, they're right in the root of what we call emotional relearning. That's why I had to incorporate it. I mean, it's really, really good stuff. And they've done some just great things on memory reconsolidation, which is at the root of emotional relearning, and we'll get into that later. So look at page 6. It's a matter of perspective. We need to look at ourselves as full and not empty. And I kind of came up with a metaphor here. A lot of us, God created us a vessel, right? And so I look at a nice, you've seen these bottles, decorative bottles. And so God has created us a bottle that's full of innate goodness. In its own essence, it's full of who we are, and it's good. It's good. That's how God created us. He loves us. We're an object of his love. He's created us with significance. He created us for a purpose. He created us an object of his love. But then he gave us to our family situation. And life happens. Life happens. And a lot of times, instead of seeing ourselves with this innate goodness, we see ourselves as having no intrinsic value, but rather it has to be earned. It has to be earned value. We only have value if we can prove we have value. So we wake up every day thinking I have to refill the goodness in the bottle because it's drained out, or at least stop from losing what little bit I have. I know that's how I used to wake up. What do I need to do today to be accepted or to make sure I feel good about myself? Or what should I not do where I won't feel condemned? And so I had both these playing. And it was constantly going on in my mind. You see, many of us feel that we only have value if we can prove we have value. And we wake up thinking every morning like I did, and if I can just be good enough today, I'll fill the bottle with goodness. If someone approves of me, there you go. If I can please someone, there you go. I'm filling it up, and by the end of the day, how'd I do? And often, even if it was full, we don't feel that good for that long. It really doesn't change anything. We just go, phew, we made it. We don't get to the point where we say, well, gee, maybe I should start feeling good about myself. wow, maybe I am lovable. Maybe I am significant. No, instead, we go to bed, and guess what happens the next morning? The next morning, it starts all over again. If I can only make it through this day without getting caught, or if I can just escape from feeling broken, or if I can just fake it and make it through the day, somehow I'll get to the end of the day and maybe there'll be something in that bottle. It won't be empty. Or maybe tomorrow I'll fill it up. There's always tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes. Now here's the catch. It doesn't matter how much good we do today, you have to start all over again tomorrow. But listen, that's not how God created you. It's not how he created you. You don't have to prove yourself to God. God made you with an intrinsic value. You don't have to earn it. He made you as a loved creation. Now, behaviorally, we're never going to be perfect. It's not going to happen. But Christ died on a cross for our sins, that we could be forgiven. And he's created this. In John it says, if we don't think we have sinned, we deceive ourselves. The truth isn't in us. But if we confess our sin, he's just, able, and righteous to forgive ourselves. He's the loving parent that says, okay, I forgive you. That's okay. Let's try again. Let's do better. Let's mature. He wants to reparent us, and it's time we started letting him do it. It's time to start being reparented and start letting some of these things, let him start showing us that, we have goodness, that we have self-worth, that we have intrinsic value, that we are accepted, that we are loved, that we're worth everything to him. And he can be that loving parent that we need. We are valued and priceless in his eyes. He poured all of our goodness, value, worth into our bottle, and he gave it to our caregivers, okay? And so we can't help necessarily what happened during life and the fact that now we think we have to redo, but what we need to do is come to a place where we rebuke the whole theory about that empty bottle. I refuse to believe that I am unacceptable to God. I refuse to believe that I am worthless, broken, no good. I refuse to believe that I am unlovable. I refuse to believe that I have to earn God's approval and love every day that I get up. I refuse to believe it. Instead, I choose to believe that I am loved. I choose to believe that God created me with value, purpose, significance. I choose to believe that those things that I've done wrong are completely forgiven. And that even though I'm not perfect, I'm in a process of maturity, and God loves me right where I am, and he'll help me get to the next level. He loves me unconditionally. I choose to believe that I am unconditionally loved. I'm an object of God's love. We need to start doing that. We need to visualize it, see it, believe it. And my friends, it's hard. It's hard because we don't have that hook. But when you focus on the love of God, when you focus on his love and you see that it's about him, and sometimes what helps me is to see, because God's put a love in my heart for my own children. If I can love my own children, even though they've done things, right? Even though there's been times when we've had difficulties, I don't judge them. I love them unconditionally. If I can do that, not very well, but I can do it, how much more can God do it? And here's the thing. He created you as his lovable creation. So it's part of who you are. And we have to stop believing the lies. We're not empty bottles. We don't need to refill every day with this need to feel like we have to earn love, that we need to just stay out of trouble. We need to start changing some of those things. We have to catch the message. We're on page 7 now. We have to negative inner thinking. If we're going to change, we need to catch the message behind the sensation that drives us, right? And so there's these deceptive brain messages, the 3rd paragraph, right? And in their groundbreaking book, You Are Not Your Brain, Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, MD, and Rebecca Gladding, MD, shared Dr. Schwartz's 4-step method for overcoming OCD. And it's now been expanded to apply to many anxiety disorders. And in their introduction, they write this, and I think this is significant, okay? There are few true necessities in life. But for many of us, it doesn't feel that way. A lifetime of habits ingrained by repetition can seemingly make us slaves to a not always beneficial master, our own brain. Nothing is more confusing or painful than when your brain takes over your thoughts, attacks your self-worth, questions your ability, overpowers you with cravings, or attempts to dictate your actions. Have you ever felt that something is compelling you to go places mentally or emotionally where you don't want to be? Do you find yourself acting in uncharacteristic ways or doing things you don't really want to be doing? Doesn't it sound just like what Paul wrote? The reason is simple, Dr. Schwartz says. Deceptive brain messages. These deceptive brain messages have intruded into your psyche and taken over your life. And look at the list here. It can lead to overthinking problems and fretting over things that are out of your control, getting stuck or panicked by unfounded fear or worries, blaming and chastising yourself for things that are not your fault, engaging in unhealthy behaviors to escape, he uses the word escape life's daily stresses, reverting to past patterns when you are trying to make a change. Bam! Doesn't he explain it? And then he continues, the more often you act in these unhealthy ways, the more you teach your brain that what is simply a habit, a learned behavior, is essential to your survival. Your brain does not distinguish whether the action is beneficial or destructive. It just responds to how you behave, and then it generates strong impulses, thoughts, desires, cravings, and urges that compel you to perpetuate your habit, whatever it may be. He says clearly, the brain can exert a powerful grip on one's life. And then he says, but, and listen now, but only if you let it. Whoa. That's what I'm saying, right? We have to start saying enough. We have to start saying stop. We have to start saying, I don't believe that. And we have to start believing the truth. And he says, but only if you let it. The good news is that you can overcome the brain's control and rewire your brain to work for you by learning to debunk the myths it has been so successfully selling you, and by choosing to act in healthy, adaptive ways. Whoa. Mic drop. Boom. Powerful, isn't it? And again, if you don't have the notes, write me, please, at ron@empowerministry.org so I can send you these where you can read these. And if you have the notes, when I'm done here, read it again. Circle it. Underline it. Start to believe it. Get it in there. I can't do that for you. I've been spending my life learning this stuff. And it gets better as I learn it more and more. That's why this is a year-long class, because it takes time to really get it in there. But it can get in there. So look at some of these emotions in the exercise on the bottom of page 7. Circle the ones that you feel you felt in the past or often. Humiliated, disrespected, insulted, mocked, accused, cheated on, bullied, beaten, manipulated, ignored, labeled. What are some of these ones that were really hurtful for you? Which ones did you experience a lot? And then turn the page, and on page 8, and there's more of them there, when any of those things happen, like misunderstood or put down or unappreciated, how did you feel? Well, I felt unappreciated. No, that's what happened. You felt unappreciated. There was a moment when you were unappreciated. Now, what emotions were you? Fear, horrified, nervous, hopeless, alarm, shock? I've put a lot of different emotions there. So put down the few things that happened to you maybe, and what are some of the emotions, and then see when those things happened and you felt the way you did, what were you believing about yourself? And this is key, because this is what we need to change. I don't deserve love. I'm a bad person. I'm worthless. I'm shameful. I'm not lovable. I'm inadequate. I'm not good enough. I don't deserve good things. Do you see the pattern here? When these things happened, I felt this way and I started to believe this. That is the secret to emotional relearning. Because when we start to get emotional, we're going to recognize it. We're going to calm it down some. We're going to regulate it. We're going to get the prefrontal cortex online, and we're going to start going, when did I feel this way before? When did this happen? What happened? What am I believing? What am I believing about myself? And when did that happen? So I can go in there and say, okay, what's the alternative to believing that? So when I was misunderstood, why do I have to feel horrified? Why can't I feel something else now? Look at what am I believing? Why do I have to believe that I don't deserve love anymore? And so we go back and we realize some of these circumstances, and we start to ask ourselves, what am I believing? And then we contradict it. We go, I don't have to believe that anymore. I'm an adult now. And what terrified me back then doesn't have to terrify me right now. If that 8-year-old that frightened me to death and beat me up in the school came up to me now as an adult and they're 8 years old, why would I be scared? I'd go, get out of here. Leave me alone. But that child in us, you see, is still there and believes that we were humiliated, that we were no good, that we're ashamed of ourselves and no one's going to like us, that we're seen as weak and no good. We go home and tell our dad, and he says, what's wrong with you? Are you scared he can't? Why didn't you beat him up? And now even our parents are starting to feel that. And so we go back to that, and oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that. That was horrible. And I may even get a little emotional thinking about it. But then I go, Jesus, come with me. Let's go back to that memory. You know what? I choose not to believe that anymore. What's the truth, Lord? What's the truth? And we start hearing from him. We start asking our own self, what's the truth? The truth is, I wasn't a fighter. I didn't want to hurt anybody. I was taken advantage of, and the fact is, so what? Doesn't label me as a failure. I'm not a failure because of that. I'm not a nobody because of that. I'm not unlovable because of that. And you know what? I went home and explained, Dad, maybe it embarrassed him for whatever reason he reacted that way, but I don't have to accept that now because it's not true. I wasn't a scaredy cat. I was a child. And we weren't supposed to be fighting. And I needed reassurance. And God can give me that. And I get that now. And I emotionally relearn the truth. Are you starting to see it a little bit? We need to capture the emotional beliefs that we have that are untrue and emotionally start to learn what is true. And on the bottom of 8 here, I talk about deconstructing those negative self-beliefs. And if we can go through this page 8 here, 7 and 8, and capture some of this, then we can go down, okay, what are we claiming here? What are we claiming? What's that negative belief in C, right? All those negative beliefs in the page 8 in the middle under C. Write one down. And then we can start asking, okay, what are some witnesses that can contradict that? What would my grandmother say about that belief? She loved me. What would she say? What would my wife say about that? She knows me now. If she was there, what would she say? What would God say about that? And we start getting these witnesses that start disconstructing those negative beliefs. And then we go down to disprove the perceived consequences, and that's where it really gets good. We can do the same thing with the perceived consequences and not doing what your inner critic thinks you should do, right? Perfectionism, fear of failure, avoiding mistakes, all those things we can say, stop. And we can call in witnesses, grandmother, our own adult self, the Lord himself, and ask him. And we can start to find out what is the truth. What is the truth? And as we hear it, we emotionally start to believe something else. It's not just a cognitive exercise. We're in the emotion. We're remembering that. And now someone is coming along and saying something that has authority, that makes sense, and they're saying something different. That's an emotional experience. That's emotional relearning. Because we're learning it in the genesis of where it happened. So that's somewhat of emotional learning. And so the results should be the same when we say this, it's faulty wiring. This feeling that I'm having, I'm recognizing it's just faulty wiring. I don't have to believe these things. I don't have to respond this way. I'm not going to die. These thoughts and beliefs and imaginations are only the result of false associations. It's faulty wiring. They're false learnings. And we can say, every time it starts to creep up now, I don't have to listen to this. This is faulty wiring. I'm not going to die if I ignore this. Instead, I choose to believe this. So, go through those pages. Write down, find out what some of these negative beliefs that you have on page 8 there in C. And then right next to it, what should be. You know what you should be thinking. You know what really makes sense. If you think you're no good, the fact is you are okay. You have innate goodness. God loves you. But now we need to emotionally believe it. And so we work on these things. We'll spend more time working on this in the future as we go over emotional relearning. Some of it's in the book Power Up right here. In my book Power Up, I kind of talk about emotional relearning and doing these very things. And then I take all kinds of subjects in here, like anger and depression, distress, doubt, fear, anxiety. And I take scripture verses and put them in the first person, like under fear and anxiety here. I am strong and courageous, not afraid or discouraged, because God is with me wherever I go. Now the scripture verse, this is true to the verse. The verse kind of says, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or discouraged, because God is with you wherever you go. Instead, I put it in the first person where we can own it and affirm it. And so I go, I am strong and courageous, not afraid or discouraged, because God is with me. And I tell you, by the time you get through a couple pages of these, you're starting to really believe this stuff. And I'll give this to you free in a PDF form, so you can take it with you on your phone or in your computer and that. And all you have to do is go to www.empowerforliving.com. That's www.empowerforliving.com/power. www.empowerforliving.com/power. and I'll give you a PDF copy. If you want a hardback, you can go to Amazon, look under Ronald Ovett. I have that. I have a new book on anxiety that's in there with 30 meditations that you can start a group with or you can do for yourself. I think you'd enjoy it. Meanwhile, if you don't have the notes, please write me at Ron at empowerministry.org, Ron at empowerministry.org. Ask me for the notes and I'll give them to you. Next week, we'll start going over some of the emotional regulation things. We'll probably start off with some of the ones, and then we'll continue and go through a whole bunch of them in the next couple weeks to come. So God bless you. Thanks for joining. Tell others about our program here, and I look forward to seeing you next time.